First off, let me just say that we are truly living in a time where anything can happen. Now, that's not really a good thing, but with social media, etc., we really are getting a front row seat. It's incredible to see what's going on in the business space. And that was usually previously behind closed doors. And because it was behind closed doors, it wasn't that tumultuous because it was a closed circle. But now with the added pressures of this all playing out on a public stage, it's gotten real interesting. And we're, of course, going to talk today about Bob Chapek and Bob Iger, who really could star someday in a Ryan Murphy feud season. All right, so when Bob Chapek was fired this Sunday evening, just before Thanksgiving, in the most sudden public firing of a movie executive that Hollywood has ever seen, the joy that erupted across the land pretty much qualifies Chapek as an actual Disney villain. And yes, that's how many fans had come to see him for quite some time. Theme park fans had disliked him back when he ran the parks. That was his job beforehand. And they were horrified when Bob Iger chose Chapek as his successor. Where'd the Chapek or Paycheck nicknames come from? Back when Bob Chapek was running Disney theme parks. So people knew that he was a problem, and that's why it was so mystifying that he even got this job in the first place. Again, as I speculated when it happened, I believe it's because Bob Iger chose someone who was really a numbers guy, and Bob Iger thought they were going to share the responsibilities. And Iger would get to do all the fun stuff, and Bob Chapek would take over all the boring, tedious stuff. But Bob Chapek surprised him and said, "I don't want to do that. I want to be the new Bob Iger." And really, muscled Iger out. And Iger came to hate Bob Chapek, as everyone else does. So then all Disney fans also jumped on the hate train when they saw what Chapek did to the company when he was running it. And then finally, the very last ones to jump on the hate train, and the ones that needed to jump on, were the board of directors, who, after having recently given Chapek a contract renewal and a big fat bonus because they thought he was doing such a great job, because they didn't care, the money was rolling in. They didn't care about, how everybody was unhappy, from Hollywood talent to fans. But when the stock started to drop, as it has suddenly and quickly, sinking to new recent lows, dropping under $100 per share, well, then Bob Chapek was shown the door. It's all about the stock, baby. It's all about the stock. And now Iger is back, but just for 2 years to fix Chapek's mess, right the company, and find another successor. Is Iger Disney's Prince Charming, a magic bullet? No, I don't think so, and we'll discuss that. But bottom line, what is good is that Bob Iger understands and respects the Disney magic. Bob Chapek did not. And I think that's what many felt that he was, what Chapek was killing. Many fans were saying the magic is gone. Iger also values creative talent and wants to make employees feel that they are appreciated. And Bob Chapek did not. By the way, Chapek's son Brian has been a Marvel executive for some time now, and with fans concerned that if Kevin Feige ever left on his own accord or was pushed out, that Brian Chapek would maybe take over there as well, which was a genuine concern. Of course, the head of the company would want his son to take over perhaps its most famous and lucrative division. But I don't know if that's going to happen right now. I don't think that Brian Chapek is necessarily going anywhere, but the now legendary fall of Papa Chapek will certainly cast a shadow on Junior as well. Where will Bob Chapek take his millions, his hundreds of millions, and go? Maybe tens of millions, but he's got a lot of millions. I don't think he'll be able to work in Hollywood, quite frankly. I think that people were very unhappy with his leadership style. But I suspect he'll probably go to another industry. Probably a little slightly more conservative industry and head that up. That's what I would expect. We'll see. We'll see. Bye, Bob Chapek. I think, there was a lot of anger towards, and this is similar to the Warner Brothers executives who really caused a lot of problems for DC. But with Bob Chapek, that anger across fandom is like times a gabillion. Like everybody was in on this and was upset. All right, now before we dig into the details, let's go over the big juicy headlines. What does this mean? What's going to happen? Well, it's very likely that the new successor Iger will choose this time around is Mr. Peter Rice, who you might recall Bob Chapek fired just a few months ago to the shock of the company, where Peter Rice was beloved by many employees, because Chapek was worried that Rice might take his job. Oh, I think he was right. So that's incredible. Peter Rice is actually British, by the way, but Disney loves the British. It would be interesting to have someone from Britain running such an American company. But Disney's a global brand at this point. And, just like Mary Poppins style intros whenever Rice does a speech or introduces a show or an event, if he were to get the gig, and be like, but that would be interesting. I think that would be funny. But first, the former head of Disney Television needs to be rehired, and then I don't think necessarily in that role. I think he'll come in if Bob Iger does go down this path, and I know a number of people in the industry who think that he will. Peter Rice will probably come in right under him, and Iger will train him to take over. And let's hope this one sticks. If you're wondering about what kind of executive Peter Rice is, he actually came over with the Fox deal. So that would be interesting. Bob Iger is very much a company man, having worked his way up ABC, although that's how he got into Disney. Bob Iger got into Disney also through an acquisition. He was at ABC, he started out as a weatherman, ended up running ABC, then jumped over to Disney and took over for Michael Eisner, and ran Disney for like 15 years. But Peter Rice came over with the Fox acquisition. Rice started out at 20th Century Fox in the film division, where he was actually the executive who oversaw the X-Men film. So he knows Kevin Feige. If you don't know this, for every major franchise, a studio executive is assigned to oversee, they're called a creative exec, to oversee that film or franchise, and to make sure the studio's best interests are looked out for, both financially and creatively. So that's what Peter Rice did when he was at Fox Films. He oversaw several huge hits for the studio before taking over Fox Searchlight, where he was the head of that division, and turning it into an awards powerhouse. He then moved on to Fox Television, where he oversaw some fan favorite shows there as well, before, with the acquisition, taking over Disney Television for a short term, where he won over the hearts and minds of Disney employees and made an enemy of Bob Chapek and got himself fired. Remember how shocked everyone was when that happened? So it's pretty amazing. Next, I don't think that any Disney department head is safe, except for probably Kevin Feige, although I think Kevin Feige is going to get some notes. I think the most likely head of the department to get the boot would be the heads of Disney Animation and Pixar, Jennifer Lee and Pete Docter, after the 1-2 punch of Lightyear and the upcoming Strange World. These are just massive flops for the company. And from what I hear, at least on the Disney Animation side, nobody would be too sad to see Lee step down, as they've been questioning her leadership for a while now. I'm not saying Lee and Docter would be fired. They are, of course, very valuable employees and have delivered hits for Disney, but I don't think they're very good at running divisions. And so, I don't know if they'd want to stay. I think Pete Docter would stay. What else is Pete Docter going to do? He's worked at Pixar his whole life. As for Jennifer Lee, she might get upset and maybe want to go make live action. But although she worked on A Wrinkle in Time, and we all saw how that turned out, so I think they should just, step back and go back to working on individual films. I also wouldn't be surprised if Josh D'Amaro at Disney Parks, the head of Disney Parks who took over for Chapek, gets the boot. Because the parks have been a real problem. Even though they've been very profitable, it's been at the cost of consumer confidence, with fans absolutely furious about being nickel and dimed for an inferior experience. It's really been a problem. And it's not necessarily D'Amaro's fault, as Chapek is widely believed to be responsible for this aggressive pricing strategy, which has just gotten worse and is about to get worse. They're gonna differentiate price points for the parks to try and, all of this has been said to be done in the name of improving the guest experience, but every single guest says it's a worse experience. So it's like all the guests are like, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills or Chapek pills. Stop trying to gaslight us. So I think that D'Amaro has been the face of that. And I think that they're going to want a new face as the head of Disney Parks to really signal that change is coming. Change has to come, but a good way to, kind of like put a Band-Aid on this right away is to stick a new face at the head of Disney Parks, especially with Universal's Epic Universe theme park right around the corner, and consumers already fleeing to Universal Studios Orlando en masse instead of Disney for a better experience and more bang for their buck. They have to stop the bleeding, particularly in Florida. We'll talk about the political situation at the very end. Iger also needs to fix the direction of almost every single Disney division, as they are now all suffering. With Kathleen Kennedy's latest contract now up in 2024, could Iger finally find a new head of Lucasfilm, which is still struggling to put out a movie after deciding to take a break. It's a much longer break than they anticipated, and where Kathleen Kennedy has been really relegated to a figurehead. You can see that at the events. She's just kind of standing there being like, yep, I'm still here. Well, Favreau and Filoni have largely taken over. I don't know if either of those guys even wants to run Lucasfilm, but they kind of are right now. And could Alan Horn be lured out of retirement yet again to return to run Disney Pictures, at least for like 2 years? But wait a minute, aren't Iger and Horn supposed to be advising Warner Brothers Discovery? Well, that's over. Before, David Zaslav was benefiting from Iger and Horn wanting to exact revenge on Chapek by helping out the competition. But now that Iger is back at Disney, that means no more tips for Warner Brothers Discovery, and Warner Brothers Discovery's chief competition supercharged once more. I've always said there's nothing wrong, with taking, plays from somebody else's playbook if they're so successful. But I do think that Zaslav has been a little bit, too single white femaling Disney, but not even effectively. He just says he wants to, and then you're like, it's like that drawing of a horse, and you're like, is that supposed to be a horse? And Zaslav's like, yeah, and you're like, this is ridiculous. Zaslav, by the way, should take note that no executive is safe in today's volatile market. And with studio executives now as famous as talent these days, they find themselves often the subject of stories not just in the trades, but everywhere, with fans talking about them and often complaining about them on social media. As I said, look what happened to the Warner Brothers executives when Discovery took over. I bet there's new urgency this morning for Zazzy to get that Warner Brothers Discovery stock out of the toilet where it's been since the company was formed. The pressure, by the way, on Gunn and Safran to deliver a DC on par with Marvel, which I'm sure is what they promised, which is why they got the gig, because, Gunn is coming over from Marvel. Well, I'm sure that Warner Brothers Discovery is going to be like, we want this tomorrow, which is impossible to deliver. That's one of DC's biggest problems, that they've always been trying to play catch up with Marvel instead of just running their own race to a degree. While still keeping an eye on Marvel, but we'll see. But I think that we'll see what kind of pressure cooker Warner Brothers Discovery comes in light of this situation over at Disney. So, is Bob Iger a magic bullet? Again, I don't think so. Let's discuss. Don't forget, it was Iger who ruined Star Wars by hiring Kathleen Kennedy, sticking with her, even though she clearly was the wrong person for the job, and approving a new trilogy that was too nostalgic. He admitted that it was a copy and paste of A New Hope, feeling that was the most risk-averse approach. And you're like, it was horrible. It ruined Star Wars. It's still trying to recover. Also, it was under Iger that Disney cast members were getting paid so little, many were sleeping in their cars in the Disneyland parking lot. And Disney Plus is Iger's baby. He feels his legacy, even more so than his purchasing of all those big brands that have turned Disney into a juggernaut and changed Hollywood forever. But what really changed Hollywood is streaming. And Bob Iger is the one that decided to wade into this pool first. He said, why can't we be our own Netflix? And that pushed all the other studios to get into the streaming game as well to compete. And this has had huge repercussions on Hollywood. Most of them not particularly good. So, Bob Iger first created a company that nobody could compete with in terms of IP, and then by adding the streaming aspect, he has just created a behemoth, and that's why all these other companies are having to combine to try and get on the same level, and they're just creating these Frankenstein monsters. It's crazy. And Disney Plus is the current yoke around the company's neck, when they're spending way too much money on content for Disney Plus and losing the revenue of leasing all of their content to other platforms. They would usually be able to lease it to other networks, to other streaming services, etc. But Disney wants to keep all of their content now on Disney Plus, so they're losing that additional revenue stream. So Disney Plus is still operating at a loss, despite the best subscriber growth in the industry. If Disney Plus can't turn a profit, what hope is there for anybody else? Plus, the brands have diluted and oversaturated themselves, particularly Marvel. And it was Iger's idea to use the biggest Disney IP to prop up Disney Plus, for which he and Bob Chapek, both Bobs, got astronomical bonuses for the initial success of Disney Plus. They made so much money off of that service. They saw a profit. Quite frankly, with the Disney Vault as the Disney Plus's true foundation, Disney Plus, unlike all the other streaming services out there, it doesn't need as much new content because it has the Disney Vault to rely on. So they should instead focus on quality over quantity. Right now, they're doubling up on releases. They have stuff coming out the same week simultaneously, and much of the content is rushed and subpar, when they should instead focus on quality prestige releases one at a time, and I think that would certainly be enough to sustain the service. Also, Chapek, as we all know, has had huge problems in the political space, particularly with Florida, with many noting that Bob Iger came out immediately against the Don't Say Gay bill, which of course was very commendable. But Iger still would have had to throw down with Ron DeSantis, who is using fighting with Disney to raise his political profile to the national level as DeSantis prepares a presidential run. DeSantis wants to fight with Disney. So Iger, despite being a political moderate, likely couldn't have headed off that fight either. Maybe it wouldn't have been as contentious, but again, DeSantis is going for theater. He wants it to be contentious. So I don't really know if Iger could have done anything that would have been better in that scenario. Probably on his side, he wouldn't have stepped in it and upset so many of his employees, but he still would have had to go toe-to-toe with Florida. We'll also see if Iger can get Disney movies back in China. As he has by the way, back to that Florida situation, Disney has worked very hard with representation, and Bob Iger is not going to back off on that because Bob Iger believes in that himself. However, I do think that Disney could get better at representation. It should be more organic. It should be less checking boxes. And if they can do quality representation, which is successful, as I've been saying, then that would really be beneficial to everyone, the groups that are looking for representation and to the company by producing hit products. So don't think that these new initiatives are going to be completely abandoned. They're probably just going to be finessed. So anyway, we'll see if Iger can get Disney movies back in China, as he has had a very good relationship with the leadership in the Middle Kingdom, having ushered in Shanghai Disneyland. However, the few movies that are still getting into China aren't doing as well as movies have done there in the past. So I don't really know if China is a big source of box office for Hollywood anyway. And they were only getting 25% of that box office. They really only needed that to help them with the records, But also, a few movies have already proven that you can still make records without China. So, get into the $1 billion club, etc. So I don't really know if Iger will push there. But I mean, they still have the park there. So that's something they're going to have to focus on. So anyway, at the very least this morning, Disney stock is headed in the right direction, which is up. So what do you think of Bob Iger returning for just 2 years? Can Chapek's mess be fixed? And how would you advise Iger to go about doing it? Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.